I'm going to be sharing a personal story around losing my dad to leukemia. Africa alone, the natural resources and what we have can be able to help us, solve most of the issues around climate change.
Let's talk Africa, the Africanness of Africa, the beauty, its people, our peculiarities. This is Unzipped Stories.
So hello and welcome to the Unzipped Stories podcast. This is your co-host Sara from Algeria. I'm happy to have this guest with us today, which is Naphtali. And this is our Climate and Justice series. And I would love our guest to introduce himself. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to Unzipped Stories. I think it serves me pleasure to be here and to be part of this, because I think one of my biggest stories was written by Shefi Dorcas.
Yes.
Dorcas. Yeah, she was the first person who started putting my story out there. I mean, we had a project, Go Green Plateau, and she came around to cover some of the stories and even participated in the project. And that was how we started engaging together. Personally, I'm involved with Captain Planet Foundation, my own company, Climb Renew, Crowdsolve, and then Planetary Alliance. And it all revolves around young people, seeing how young people can be able to identify certain challenges in their communities and profile solutions. But I'm most interested in building social enterprises, helping these young people. After they've identified an idea, how do they make sure that this is sustainable enough? How can they build solutions that can last over time? And that's what I'm doing.
Okay, thank you again. So this episode will be a bit different. So we'll start with some questions, because you are the expert. So you will educate our listeners on this topic. And then we will have climate justice trivia, for some fun. And lastly, a story time segment where you would share, your experience with climate justice, and something you have witnessed for firsthand or you were involved in, of course. So let's start with the questions. What exactly is climate justice? And can you define it in simpler terms for someone who has no idea what that is?
Carbon tax, people paying to pollute more. So how about countries that cannot pay for such carbon credits and all of that? What do they do? So that's the whole idea of climate justice. So we are now saying, can we have a space where everybody can contribute just as much as they can be able to do as individuals, being it as individuals, as government, as communities? And once we can be able to achieve that, then I think we have something to start talking about justice and in the climate space. So how can these developing countries be able to come up with solutions or be able to have a fair share? How do we make them pay, if at all you want to call it pay? How do they come up with solutions that can be able to, not just because they are being compelled to do that, but because they have the resources that can take care of their immediate challenges? And those who have much resources pay because, of course, people or countries who have developed have built, factories over time. And
right.
Let's start talking about emissions and all of that. Who are those that are contributing more, and how can they be able to pay much to ensure that we are able to, adapt to most of the challenges around climate change?
Can you give us examples of climate injustice cases?
Okay, typically we are all aware that there are data out there that shows that Africa is contributing less than 3% of the global emission. Okay, I'm making a case with Africa. But then you still see that when we go to Conference of Parties, COP, you hear of COP26, COP27, and the current one is coming, COP28. In as much as Africa is contributing less, it is expected that Africa is able to, pay some amount in climate change mitigation and all of that. I think that's a typical example that if we can dissect that and understand what the impact of such is in Africa, then we can see that it is perhaps straining the African budget. Yes, we have the materials, we have the natural resources,
Let's talk Africa, the Africanness of Africa. The beauty eats people, our peculiarities. This is Unzip Stories.
How can we ensure that these people are not just able to come up with solutions, but these solutions are contextualized to their own local, realities? So that's where the whole idea of climate justice started coming in. Okay, if we're to talk about people who have, or people who are rich, or people who have the resources where they can pay things like carbon tax, go into carbon offsetting and all of that. Okay, we have an idea now around, carbon tax, people paying to pollute more. So how about countries that cannot pay for such carbon credits and all of that? What do they do? So that's the whole idea of climate justice. So we are now saying, can we have a space where everybody can contribute just as much as they can be able to do as individuals, be it as individuals, as government, as communities? And once we can be able to achieve that, then I think we have something to start talking about justice and in the climate space. So how can these developing countries be able to come up with solutions or be able to have a fair share? How do we make them pay, if at all you want to call it pay? How do they come up with solutions that can be able to, not just because they are being compelled to do that, but because they have the resources that can take care of their immediate challenges? And those who have much resources pay because, of course, people who, or countries who have developed, have built, factories over time. And let's start talking about emissions and all of that. Who are those that are contributing more, and how can they be able to pay much to ensure that we are able to, adapt? How do we ensure that, okay, instead of asking Africans perhaps to pay for some of these damages, can there be a fair exchange between, resources? Or can it be that, Africa have a space in the table to also talk about some of the things they can be able to contribute, not to compel them to do that for any reasons? Yeah, I think that's another example I can be able to share.
Okay, thank you so much. And what are some example of initiatives that have successfully advanced climate justice?
Okay, a typical example would be what Unzip Story is doing right now. How is Unzip Story projecting some of the, climate challenges in most of these developing countries? Like, a case study is Africa, because most of the activities revolves around Africa. Unzip Story has been able to put out, stories out there of some of the challenges people are facing. In as much as Africa, is contributing less, we have other means or initiatives, localized initiatives around forest, being it tree planting, being it, organizing green campaigns and all of that. And this is contributing so much to the, global awareness around issues around climate change. These are some of the examples. Myself, like I said, I've worked with young people and I've been able to identify several talents, people who are coming up with local initiatives on how to solve some of these challenges that we are facing in Africa around climate change. So how can we ensure that these people are being put on the table and are able to get the required support such that they are not being taken away from Africa, but then whatever it is that they are proposing to help solve some of the challenges in Africa is being localized here, being a transfer of technology. How do we get these talents localized here? How do we make sure that their solutions are being projected here in Africa? And how do we make sure that we're able to get some of the technologies from these developed countries down here in Africa to adapt to our own current challenges? Yeah, so this is how I want us to all be looking at what climate, justice is.
Definitely, yes. Okay. And what steps can an average person take to contribute to climate justice? Some people are totally unaware. They want to know, how can they help?
I was conversing with one of my friends. She has a legal background, but then she was asking how can she be able to play perhaps in the energy sector. And a typical example I gave her was, when you visit some of these remote communities, many of them do not have power. And when you begin to talk about issues around gender, who are those that are mostly impacted by this climate change? And then if you deep dive, you will know that, women and children, because if they do not have the sufficient power to perhaps cook or take care of some of their domestic, issues, then they are exposed to what we call maybe particulates due to using local means of fuel, like cooking with the firewood and all of that. my typical research was on particulates, and we could see that like PM 2.5 and PM 10 is mostly common from burning, being it refuse, burning firewood, or using any unsustainable means of generating energy. So women had largely been impacted because they are mostly, taking care of the home chores and all of that. Yes, and potentially that threatens their health, particularly causes lung cancer, breathing difficulties and all of that. So that's a typical project that, okay, she coming from a legal background can say, okay, can we identify these communities that lack access to power? Can we identify this community? Can we check, okay, if at all you have the necessary data and modalities, can we check, okay, how many women are being impacted by this? How can we empower these women such that they are able to come up with solutions? Okay, if we are saying they shouldn't cut down trees, because that would be injustice at their own end. If we are saying they shouldn't cut down trees, okay, what are other alternative sources of energy that we can be able to provide for them? And okay, can we pool resources to get them, being it some kind of stove that help solve the issue of particulate matter? If we can't go into huge investments like renewables and all of that, can we come up with something that they can be able to use in order to cook and take care of their own energy, deficiency? So these are some of the ways that, okay, we can say, if we're saying don't do this, it wouldn't be fair if we're not able to provide an alternative for them. So can we be able to put resources that, being it government, CSOs, or even private individuals or companies, can we be able to solve this challenge around energy? And I think this is a typical example of what I suggested to her.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much for your answers. And I would like to move to the trivia on climate justice. Yes. Let's test our guests' knowledge on this. We have number 1, which is a bit easy, but which continent is often considered the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, including rising sea levels and extreme weather events?
Okay, let's say Africa.
Yes,
Africa.
spot on. Yeah. Number 2. Which major international climate conference took place in Glasgow, Scotland, 2021?
2021, Glasgow, Scotland. Aside COP26?
Yes, that's it. Yes.
Okay.
And number 3, so what is the term for the practice of unfairly placing environmentally harmful facilities, like factories, in low-income communities?
I say land grabbing.
So it's environmental racism.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And number 4, which teenage climate activist from Sweden gained worldwide recognition for her Friday for Future school strikes?
Greta Thunberg.
Yes. And who was the African environmental and human rights activist awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her work on environmental justice and sustainable development?
Honestly, not sure. I don't know her name.
She was famous for a Green Belt movement. No idea.
I don't remember.
It's Wangari Maathai, Kenyan woman. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. Let's move to the storytelling segment, where you just share with us a story where you were involved and about, climate injustice, climate justice. If you have witnessed climate injustice in front of you, or you work together towards climate justice.
Okay. Well, personally, I wouldn't say I have witnessed whether climate justice or injustice in the first place, but I will say I've been impacted heavily by climate change. And I think along the line, it has a way of tying down to injustice, of course, because if at all there were necessary things in place, perhaps such wouldn't have happened. I'm going to be sharing a personal story around losing my dad to leukemia. And I will say, first of all, we got to know about this late as a family. And I think we got to know about it late, because not really because he hasn't taken his health, or he hasn't prioritized his health. My dad was someone who is always checking, and he encouraged all of us to do that. But then I would say perhaps due to maybe lack of medical facilities, of course, because it's not everybody that can afford flying out or just moving out to a place where he can get these medical facilities that would have dictated such a thing on time. So I will say, in some way, this is injustice on our own part, because perhaps the government has failed to provide the necessary health facilities that can help support being in rural communities or whatever it is. So, I mean, this is personal to me. And on the other hand, me knowing the connection between particulate matter and human health, and most of these things comes as a result of lack of perhaps good ambient air. You have a lot of pollution around and all of that. Perhaps if we knew, or if many of the community members knew that, okay, you shouldn't burn this refuse, or you should reduce the intake of plastic, because there are research that shows that at least every human being consumes about 1 credit card of plastic at the end of I think a year or so. I'm not really sure about the statistic. But if you start checking, these are the impacts of climate change in the first place, because we do not have the necessary awareness. So I would still say, if at all we have the awareness, if at all there are much educational materials around, if we are saying climate change, are we able to educate people, the vulnerable communities? Do they have the necessary knowledge? Do they know what to do? So all of these are, typical example that someone who can be impacted, if at all they knew about some of these things, maybe they would have averted or avoid, such situation. But to cut the long story short, we lost him to leukemia. And so part of the things now I'm doing personally as a person is that, okay, I've told my family members, plastic contain bisphenol. Can they reduce the intake of plastic? Okay, they should stop using hot water or exposing plastic to intense heat, being it putting warm food inside or hot food inside, whatever it is, or using plastic spoons to cook or whatever it is. I mean, these are ways that personally I've been able to educate my families about that. And of course, burning refuse. I mean, I've advocated for sustainable use of plastics. Can we convert? Can we recycle? Can we reuse? Can we upcycle this plastic waste? If at all we can't do that, can we find a way of just making sure that we're able to gather them and then give them to organizations who can do that? A typical example was a project we led at Nigeria University of Technology and Management, where I had my postgraduate. Myself and a couple of team came around. Okay, we actually preached the idea of collecting all of the plastics we're consuming in our school. And then I think we had about 5,000 PET bottles, 6,000 PET bottles, at the end of the day. And we made sure that, okay, they actually understand why. And it's funny because many of them knew that, okay, this is what they were supposed to do. But somehow, I mean, you're talking about highly intellectual people. Like, this were community where they selected 60 African scholars, like 60 people from Africa. So many of them knew that these things are things they should do. So in some way, I think this community, forming a community to be able to encourage people, push ideas, having a community around that accept a particular norm that, okay, this is how we should live and this is how we should try to do things. I think it helps a lot. And this is the same idea that indigenous communities or marginalized communities, they are so communal in nature. And whatever it is they're going to suggest to them must be able to align, or they must be able to agree as a group that, okay, we're going to do this. So it was the same idea in that school. Okay, we said, can we collect all of these plastic bottles? And that was how we did. And at the end of the day, like I said, we realized about 6,000 PET bottles. So if we hadn't done that, perhaps we'd just be throwing them around and they'll end up in our oceans. Like we know by 2050, we'll have more plastic than fishes. So nobody can tell where these plastics are going to come from, the Pacific. So I see that as injustice in the first place, because if at all we had enough awareness, if at all we had enough understanding of this impacts of climate change and what are the danger zones that one should avoid. Because honestly, typically here in Africa, we are not seeing, the obvious idea like industries and all of that, where we have a lot of emissions. But even in our own little ways, in the way we do our life, being it cutting down trees and all of that, are people able to understand that that has a long-lasting impact in the environment and human health?
Yeah.
These are things that I think we should keep educating people and creating awareness, and perhaps pull the necessary resources to help minimize the impact of climate change. And that's what my company is doing currently, creating advisory services. We help NGOs and businesses to meet their ESG goals, because many companies want to play in the green transitioning. So how do they do that? And even if it's a multinational company, how do they make sure that their ideas and whatever it is in their corporate social responsibility, as a corporate social responsibility, or whatever projects they want to implement in the community, how does it align with this community's ideologies and all of that? So this is what we've been pushing. And how can they be able to build sustainable products? How do we make sure that they are not just setting up companies and business arms in such communities, but how is the community benefiting in a sustainable way? These are some of the things we do in my company, and this is what I've been advocating for. Yeah.
All right. So would you say there are increasing number of companies who want to be more sustainable, or just few?
Yes. Now that I will say the awareness is really getting momentum day by day. So it is also important that it doesn't just end at the momentum or at the awareness level, but also we also push for implementations. How can we demand that companies, government, and whoever it is that is benefiting from such communities, how do we demand that we have a fair share of whatever it is? Like someone said, don't just share the burdens, share the bounties too. You are telling us that we have issues around climate change. I mean, if we're able to come up with solutions, how do we also benefit? Yes, in as much as companies are getting more awareness about building sustainable products or acting in a sustainable manner, are they being able to also make sure that the community is benefiting, indigenous communities, host communities, and whatever it is I call it, are they also benefiting from such, sustainability entirely? Are they also benefiting? That's a question that we should be asking, or we should be demanding these companies. And of course, even developed countries, if they are not able to cut down their emission, or if they are cutting, are they contributing to also make sure that communities or countries that do not have this capacity to meet up, are they giving them back such that they're able to, implement some of these solutions? Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So everyone is responsible in a way, especially. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. And last thing, what would you tell our viewers? Something they should ponder upon, think about?
I mean, I've been in this space for some time. I always advocate for, social enterprises, because at the end of the day, it is not about the solution you're proposing, but how do you ensure that after its implementation, it is sustainable enough? And one of the biggest challenge has always been around financing, climate financing. So the demand is, this climate change space, it's capital intensive. That's the truth. For us to be able to shift from, what we're doing to what we need to do now, like renewables, whatever it is that we're proposing, it is capital intensive. So I'm going to tell the viewers that if you want to play in the climate change space, first of all, think about how your actions can be sustained. So I will propose that you make it a social enterprise, such that it takes care of environmental benefit, social, and then economical. Because it is only when you're able to generate some revenue that you can sustain whatever project it is that you're running. I'll give a typical example. Okay, assuming now I start maybe an awareness campaign, or I start an awareness campaign around plastic waste. I'm telling people, okay, use less plastic, reuse, recycle, and all of that. And then I do not think of a way of generating, being it little revenue, to help me run whatever it is campaign that I'm doing. At the end of the day, I'll start relying on donations. What if those donations doesn't come? Or what if I do not have companies who are willing to support me? How am I able to sustain this project? And if I'm not able to pull those donations, then the project dies off. And tomorrow, if someone is coming with that same idea of, okay, preaching about sustainability and all of that, everybody would think that, look, we all know them. They come today and then tomorrow you don't see them. But once you're able to build that arm that generates a little income, it mustn't be like a capitalist kind of a thing where you extort the people, then you're able to keep the wheels moving. You're running your enterprise. You're doing what you need to do in terms of advocacy, like I made an example. And then, of course, you're also proposing ideas that is generating income. In that way, then you can be able to implement several other projects because you have an income stream coming in. You can able to implement. Yes. And then the communities are going to believe whatever it is that you're preaching to them. And they understand that, oh, look, this is to our own benefit. Serious. And it gets to a point where you're perhaps employing the community members. So that's another way of making them involved in such projects and owning it. So that's what I keep preaching. And it's what I'll still say to the viewers. Find an arm that makes whatever it is, an idea or whatever it is, make it a social enterprise. And in that way, it will be sustained over time. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of work, but it's worth it. And we should.
Yeah, it's worth it. It's worth it. Right.
Okay, thank you so much, Naphtali, for being here and for answering our questions, educating, the people about this, and hopefully we will save our planet. Of course. Yes,
Thanks
there is no planet to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's talk Africa, the Africanness of Africa, the beauty, its people, our peculiarities. This is Unzip Stories. I am DS Bello.